On August 14, 2005, 26-year-old Amanda K. Jones disappeared from Festus, Missouri. Amanda was 8.5 months pregnant when she vanished. On the day of her disappearance, Amanda met Brian Westfall, the alleged father of her unborn child, at the Hillsborough Civic Center at around 1 p.m. to discuss custody details. Roughly 15 minutes into their meeting, at 1:15 p.m., she took a call from her former sister-in-law. After their meeting, they were supposed to go have lunch together at the Off the Hook restaurant. However, she has never been heard from or seen again. After 3 hours of trying to reach their daughter, Amanda's family became very concerned. They would reach out to friends of Amanda's, but they hadn't heard from her either. Her parents would drive to her house to see if she was there. However, Amanda was nowhere to be found. At this point, Brian Westfall is most likely the last person to have ever seen Amanda. Brian and Amanda had dated briefly after meeting at a Christmas party in 2004, but their relationship didn't last long, and Brian didn't hear from her again until February 2005, when she told him she was pregnant. Brian stated he didn't believe Amanda's unborn child was his, and he didn't want to continue his relationship with her.
He told her that it's not his, but he would pay for her to have an abortion.
Wait, it wasn't his?
That's what he said.
But even though it's not his, he's going to pay for Amanda to have an abortion?
Exactly. That's like, why would you do that if it's not yours?
And what was Amanda's response?
No.
Amanda told friends she was considering seeking child support from Brian. She met him on the day of her disappearance to discuss his role in the baby's life and what, if any, type of child support she could expect from him. However, on the day they met, Brian would once again tell Amanda he was not the father of her unborn child. Brian's version of events that day would change a few times within 24 hours. First, he said they never made it to lunch because Amanda got upset because he said he wasn't the father of her unborn child. So according to Brian, she went to the restroom, and when she came out, she no longer wanted to go to lunch. Brian stated he left the Civic Center and Amanda stayed behind. However, Amanda's mother, Bertha, said that Brian told her that him and Amanda did go to lunch, but went their separate ways around 2 p.m. A few hours later, she spoke to Brian again, and this time he said she had gotten upset while having lunch at the restaurant, and he left while she was upset and in the restroom. He would tell investigators a completely different story. He stated they met in the parking lot of the Hillsborough Civic Center at 1 p.m. and spoke inside his car for about an hour, at which point he says she returned to her car and he went back to some volunteer work he was doing at the Civic Center. Then he claimed that he saw Amanda 3 hours later parked in a different area of the parking lot and still talking on her phone. Later that same day, Amanda's friends and family would go to the Civic Center and find her blue 1997 Pontiac Sunfire still sitting in the parking lot, unlocked and abandoned. At this point, they would call the Jefferson County Police Department and report her missing. Police would find her purse inside the vehicle, but her keys, wallet, and cell phone were missing. They would also check her cell phone records and find that the last time she used her phone was when she took the incoming call at 1:15 p.m. At this point, police would start to question many aspects of Brian's story. For instance, the police report showed that Amanda's cell phone records indicated that she did not receive or make any phone calls after her quick phone call with her former sister-in-law. However, Brian stated he saw her on her phone later while she was sitting in her car. Even more, the authorities find it inconceivable that anyone, especially a woman 34 weeks pregnant, could sit in a car on a hot and humid August day for 3 hours. It is also important to note that the air conditioning in Amanda's car was broken at the time of her disappearance, making this even more of an impossibility. Also, it was very suspicious that Brian had initially told Amanda's mother they had gone to lunch together as planned and hadn't just stayed in the parking lot. Brian was somewhat cooperative with the investigation and maintains his innocence in Amanda's disappearance. He did allow investigators to search his home, but he limited the places they were allowed to search, and that is the only time they have searched his property. Not only did Amanda have a close and loving relationship with her then 4-year-old daughter Hannah, but also Amanda and her family were thrilled about the arrival of her second child. Amanda also enjoyed her job as a loan administrator at Eagle Bank and was well loved by everyone who knew her. Detective Doc Coombs, who has worked the case since 2011, is adamant that Amanda did not leave of her own free will. Her loved ones stated it was very uncharacteristic of her to leave without warning, and she could not walk easily because of her pregnancy. While her former husband, Scott Jones, was questioned by police, he is not considered a suspect in her case and has since passed away as of November 2007. After his death, their daughter was placed in the care of Amanda's parents. Brian is still considered by many people to be the prime suspect in Amanda's disappearance. Not only is Brian the last person known to have seen Amanda, but also he is said to have been far from excited about his impending fatherhood. He apparently had a longtime girlfriend when he and Amanda had connected. There has been no activity on her cell phone or credit cards since her disappearance, and no evidence that she checked into any hospital to deliver her baby. Her last known credit card purchase was at a drugstore where she bought a soda and hairspray hours before she went missing. As of today, her case remains unsolved. Bianca Noelle Piper was 13 years old and in the 8th grade at Winfield Middle School when she went missing on March 10, 2005, in Foley, Missouri. Bianca suffered from ADHD and severe bipolar disorder. She had mood swings, aggressive tendencies, anxiety attacks, and difficulty with self-control because of her conditions. Bianca had been in counseling since she was 4 years old. If she did not take her daily medication, she could possibly suffer from hallucinations and be very aggressive. Bianca's mother, Shannon Tanner, claimed that a therapist had advised her to drive Bianca a distance from home and make her walk back alone to deal with her aggression. So, when Bianca and her mother had a fight on the evening of March 10th about Bianca not washing the dishes and Bianca had a tantrum, her mother dropped her off at McIntosh Hill Road, a mile from their home, about 6:15 p.m., leaving her with a flashlight. Bianca and her mother had tried the treatment only once prior and it had been helpful, so Bianca requested that it be done again. She also asked to be dropped off further from home than she had before. She never arrived home and has never been heard from again. Her mother would report her missing at 8:20 p.m. That night in 2005, the temperatures dipped very low, so at first emergency personnel believed she may have gotten lost and froze to death. The road was a gravel road without lights, which is why her mother gave her the flashlight. All Bianca was wearing at the time of her disappearance was a shirt, a hoodie, jeans, and tennis shoes. However, since an extensive search turned up no signs of Bianca, authorities now think she may have been abducted. She has no history of running away from home. Her mother and her mother's live-in boyfriend have both passed polygraph tests, and her biological father was extensively interviewed, but none of her family members are considered suspects in the case. Searchers covered the area for weeks, and even the best dog teams in the country couldn't find a trace of her. Investigators interviewed every registered sex offender in Lincoln County within the first 24 hours after her disappearance, eventually clearing all of them. The case files contain more than 200 exhausted leads, including interviews with more than 20 self-described psychics. Many leads came into police after two other missing children, Sean Hornbeck and Ben Omby, were found alive in Kirkwood after their abductions by pizzeria manager Michael Devlin. Authorities initially suspected Devlin could be linked to other missing child cases and formed a multi-jurisdictional task force to investigate this theory. In October 2007, the task force was dissolved with no arrests made in Bianca's case. Bianca's father died in 2009, but her mother and sister are still alive and looking for her. Her mother now lives in St. Charles, Missouri. As of today, Bianca's case remains unsolved. Phoenix Lucille Coldon was last seen sitting in her car in her driveway on Country Brook Drive in the Spanish Lake area of St. Louis, Missouri on December 18, 2011. Her father saw her drive away at 2:20 p.m., not knowing he may never see his daughter again. She was only 23 years old at the time of her disappearance. Phoenix came from a religious family that regularly attended church together. She had been homeschooled, was a member of the handbell choir, was a regional fencing champion, played the piano, and was even taking violin lessons. While Phoenix had previously attended the University of Missouri, St. Louis, her family later discovered that she had dropped out of her classes and was no longer enrolled. On the afternoon of December 18th, after going to church, Phoenix was seen sitting in the driveway of her parents' home in her black, four-door 1998 Chevy Blazer using her cell phone. Her father, Lawrence, last saw his daughter as she was pulling out of their driveway. Although it was unusual that she hadn't informed anyone as to where she was heading, he didn't think much about it and assumed Phoenix was going to a friend's house or to the nearby convenience store that she frequented. In the early morning hours of December 19th, her mother, Goldia, could not shake the feeling that something was wrong with her daughter. Phoenix never stayed out past 1:20 a.m. Later that day, Goldia contacted police to report her missing. While the officer who was dispatched to their home claimed there was currently nothing he could do given the fact that Phoenix was legally an adult, he agreed to run the license on her car but found nothing. The only advice he was able to give the Coldons was to call the local hospitals, which they spent the rest of the day doing. Unbeknown to her parents, at 5:30 p.m. the previous day, 3 hours after Phoenix left her driveway, the Blazer was found abandoned near the intersection of 9th Street and St. Clair Avenue. Where the vehicle was found was a 25-minute drive from her home. It was still running and the driver's side door was open. There was no sign of Phoenix at the scene, and she has never been heard from again. The police had the vehicle towed but did not realize it belonged to a missing person. The Blazer was originally impounded a little more than 2 hours after Phoenix was last seen driving it, and the officer who ran the plates the following day discovered nothing. The Coldons were never officially notified by authorities about their vehicle. The police report later obtained by the Coldons' private investigator includes some conflicting information. In one section, it is reported that there was an adult female victim. In another section, it was noted that there was no driver. A second report has a filing date listed 2 weeks after the impounding. The Coldons' private investigator notified them that the responding officer was advised by his union representative to speak with no one. That same officer who arrived on the scene claimed he found nothing in the car. However, Phoenix's driver's license, purse, glasses, and shoes were in the car. All the paperwork needed to identify who the vehicle belonged to, including the Coldons' home address, was found in the glove box. Investigators asked Phoenix's parents to look through her room in hopes of finding any clues. Stuffed in a notebook was a strange note. When Phoenix's parents originally looked at the note, they didn't think it was in Phoenix's handwriting. However, they would later start poring over old notebooks of Phoenix's to determine if they might be wrong. Goldia would later come to the conclusion that she had initially been wrong and the note was in fact written by Phoenix. She was able to figure out what the note said and inform the police. Goldia believed she might have written the note either before a church service or after, when Phoenix dropped Goldia off at the parlor for fellowship and she waited in her vehicle. According to Goldia, the message was along the lines of, "We think you need to make up your mind before 2012, or else I will show you what I can do about your parents." In an interview on Real Talk with Tamara, Goldia explains that she doesn't believe this note was to or from somebody, but that her daughter was jotting down something to relay to her. Phoenix's manner of writing on that piece of paper was consistent with the way she wrote in her school books when hurriedly taking notes in a class. The Coldons soon made another alarming discovery. Through one of Phoenix's friends, they learned that she had a boyfriend with whom she lived with for a short while. At the time she went missing, Phoenix was living with her parents, but at age 18, she had moved out briefly and they believed she was living with a female roommate. Phoenix's friend was sure that this mystery boyfriend would know her whereabouts as they were still dating, but he denied knowing anything. The boyfriend also told detectives that he hadn't spoken to Phoenix before her disappearance. However, phone records indicate otherwise. On the day before, December 17th, phone records show about 10 calls between the two of them. One incoming call lasted 116 minutes. On December 18th, he phoned Phoenix at 9:41 a.m. and they spoke for 6 minutes, and then that afternoon at 1:46 p.m., Phoenix made a call to him that lasted 1 minute. It doesn't appear the boyfriend is a suspect, but suspiciously claimed he had not had any prior contact with Phoenix, nor has he ever reached out to her family. As far as anyone knows, Phoenix had no reason to be in the neighborhood where her car was found. So, was she meeting someone around there, and if so, why? Does the note that her mother found have any connection to Phoenix's whereabouts? As of today, this case remains unsolved. "29-year-old Judy Wardrip, known by her middle name Tulane, was last seen at her job at the Bethany Motel in Bethany, Missouri on December 10, 1984. The Bethany Motel was her family's business founded by her father. The motel was a small establishment with only 18 rooms and had previously been the Bethany skating rink. Her father, James Wardrip, a local carpenter, had built the rink and decided to convert it. The motel's location was perfect. While outside the city limits, it was near Highway 69. She went there for her shift that morning, bringing her dog, a Lhasa Apso named Moppet. Since being given control of the motel, Judy and her sister, Janet, had found the job time-consuming. The two young women oversaw all aspects of the operation, from checking in guests to maintaining rooms. They alternated running the motel by working in shifts, which left little time for themselves. But in what spare time Judy did have, she maintained a relationship with her boyfriend, Irving Pavluk, a divorced welder who was several years her senior. Pavluk resided in Texas, and although Judy's father didn't approve of Pavluk, the relationship continued. Judy also spent time riding her motorcycle, and she loved animals. Judy's sister, Janet, had enrolled in a photography class in Kansas City and left early on the morning of December 10th. She spent the day at the class and did not return to Bethany until later that night, when it was time for her shift at the motel. When she got to the motel that evening to start her shift, there was no signs of Judy anywhere. This was very uncharacteristic of her. She and her sister were the only employees at the motel, and Judy was responsible and wouldn't have left the motel unattended for an extended period of time. Judy's car was still in the parking lot. Her purse, identification, clothing, jewelry, the .38 caliber Smith & Wesson the women kept, and money in the cash drawer were still in place. The only trace of Judy, along with her belongings, was a half a cup of coffee in the room that Judy had apparently been cleaning. Judy's dog, Moppet, also disappeared with her. Her sister called the police, who began a search, but nothing turned up. None of the motel's guests reported seeing or hearing anything unusual that day. Although Judy's mother had suffered from depression and took her own life a few years before Judy disappeared, her daughter had never shown any indication of depression. She had already bought Christmas presents for her family for the upcoming holidays. Judy's sister believes Judy would have contacted her by now if she could have. James Wardrip died in 2010, never knowing what happened to his daughter. As of today, her case remains unsolved. Robert Wayne Donnell was brutally murdered on June 11, 1994, in St. Genevieve, Missouri. He was 30 years old at the time and worked as a construction worker and was from the DeSoto area. On June 11th, his body was found severely burned in the back of his white Chevy pickup on Roth Road near the Jefferson County line. His body was burned beyond recognition. At the time of his death, Robert had 3 sons, with the youngest being less than 2 years old. He was described as a very likable, low-key person with no known enemies. Little evidence turned up from the investigation into his murder. Many people were interviewed, and several leads only led to a dead end. Robert was adopted as a child, and since his death through DNA testing, his children were able to find his biological parents and become closer to a family that they never knew about. Unfortunately, there is very little information available in this case. However, his son, Matt Donnell, has said that the Sheriff's Office and the Missouri State Highway Patrol have both investigated the case and have followed leads in many different directions, but have never come up with a suspect. As of today, the family still seeks answers to his death, but the case remains unsolved.